Hey, y'all. My name's Jeff. Before I start the talk, I just want to say how honored I am to be here. The Alliance of Independent Authors is such an amazing organization. I'm proud to be a part of it. And yeah, I just got to say, I was going to take a minute to say, when I started publishing 8 years ago, I would have been completely lost. And I probably never would have put a book out. If I hadn't have been able to lean on the wisdom and generosity of members of the Alliance that are willing to just share with those of us who are coming up what they've learned along the way. So this is an honor to be a part of this. I really appreciate it. And if you're not a member of the Alliance, you should be. What are you doing? Anyway, yeah, I'm excited about today. I'm excited about that we get to do this, and I really appreciate the Alliance of Independent Authors for putting things like this on. So let's get going. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to talk through some stuff. If you don't know me, I'm the dialogue doctor. I am not actually a doctor. I just play one on a podcast. But I'm over at dialogue-doctor.com. You can find me there. So today we are going to talk about the theme of the conference. How do we reach more readers? I would love to be able to give you Mark Dawson level marketing stuff, but I don't know. I don't know any of that. I'm still learning from him. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about how to make your book so engaging it gets passed from reader to reader to reader, because that's what we want, right? We want that viral sensation in a book. We want readers to be like, hey, did you read this? You have to read this. We want readers without us trying to persuade them or coerce them. We want readers just to go to Instagram on their own and be like, oh my gosh, look at what this scene did to me. This scene was amazing. And everybody has to read this book. That's what we want. So I'm going to give you some tips today that aren't around getting your book in front of readers, but around making your book so good that when a reader reads it, they want to go buy your next book, and they want to tell their friends and family about the book they just read. That's the goal today, right? We're going to take the next 50 minutes and try to do that together. So there's 4 ways for a reader to reach, four ways to reach readers with your book. 4 things you need to be doing. The first thing is you got to think of your plot as an emotional journey. We're going to talk about all these more, by the way. I'm just giving you the overview. You have to think of your plot as an emotional journey. Number 2, you have to illustrate character growth by evolving the character's voice. Number 3, use your cast to empower conflict with your characters. And number 4, communicate emotional change by modulating your character's voice. So all of this overall, when we talk about creating a book that a reader wants to pass to other readers, when that happens, what we have done is we've successfully created such a dynamic and compelling book that it makes the reader go, wow, this was an experience that I want to share. And in order to create that kind of experience with a reader, we need to tap in to their emotional core. We need to hit them in a way that moves them and helps them connect with the characters and connect with the story so deeply that they feel themselves in it, right? And that's what we're talking about. These 4 things help you do that. So that's what we're going to spend the next 50 minutes or so going through. 4 tricks to help you make your book so emotionally engaging that readers will pass it on to other readers. A little bit about me. If you don't know who I am, I've published 11 novels and over 100 short stories. My last novel came out in May of 2022. I was very excited about it. It's a 140,000 word monster that I released into the world. Yeah, super pumped to get it out. But I am a writer. I am an independent publisher myself. During the day, I lead a writing team for an innovative training company that simulates difficult conversations. And then my side joy It's not, I mean, I do hustle, but it's really joy. My side joy is I work with authors to improve their dialogue. So I take what I do in my day job, which is mimicking difficult conversations, and then I apply it to writing dialogue and fiction. And I do that through a podcast, a free weekly newsletter. I teach courses, and I also do dialogue coaching sessions. So that's a little about me before we get into content. So you're like, who's this random dude that's talking to me right now? That's a little bit about me. All right, so 4 ways to reach readers with your book. Way number 1, think about your plot as an emotional journey. And I don't know if that's new to you or not. It was new to me. When I first started writing, I really obsessed over plot structure. And I went and read all the books I could read, I could get my hands on plot structure, and I dove deeply into the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. And I did the Save the Cat, writes a novel, amazing plot structure, just fantastic book. And I did I started looking at play structure. I read about 3-act plays and 5-act plays and 7-act plays. So I dove into all of it, and I loved it. It really helped me. But as I started writing books and looking at that plot structure, I started asking, like, okay, what is happening with all of these structures? What's going on? And the thing about a plot structure is that it is a series of beats designed to create an emotional experience for your reader. A plot structure, regardless of which one you go with, is a series of beats designed to create an emotional experience for your reader. That's why we love them, because they're these cheat codes we have, right? That's like, hey, if your reader reads this at this, if you design your plot in this way at this point in the story, your reader is going to feel this. At the dark night of the soul, your reader is going to be crushed. At the big rally at the end before the 3rd act, your reader is going to feel elated, right? Like, that's why we have these plot structures. We have these plot structures because we know if we move our story along these beats, then the user is going to have this emotional experience. So plot structure, we have beats. The one I have up here is the 3-story method plot structure. There's a book by Jay Thorne and Zach Bohannon. If you're looking for a place to start with plot structure, highly recommend it. It kind of takes plot structure down to the roots. It's really great. So we've got our plot structure, we've got our beats, knowing that those beats are designed to create an emotional experience. Now you, as the author, get to determine what that emotional experience is, right? How are you going to use those beats to create this emotional feeling? What kind of feeling are you taking your reader on, right? If you just ask me to go for a ride, you're like, hey, get in my car, we're going to go for a ride. I want to know, like, where are we going? Are we going on the freeway? I live in a big city in the United States. Are we just going to go laps around the beltway that circles the city? Or are we driving out in the woods in the middle of nowhere? Are we going to take a bunch of hills and like a bunch of twists and turns? Or are we going to go sit in traffic in the middle of the city and just look up at the big buildings? Because those different drives, all those different things are different experiences for me. Right. So when your reader is coming to a book, what kind of journey are you taking them on? That's the question we need to be able to answer as we design this. Kurt Vonnegut talked about this in this amazing way. There's a free thing on YouTube that you can go watch. Just Google Kurt Vonnegut plot structure. It's a fantastic talk. But he talks about the shape of story. And what he was doing was, for his thesis, he was looking at how different cultures experienced story emotionally. What was the emotional shape of these different cultures' stories? And he thought he could say, like, hey, some cultures look at it this way, some cultures look at it that way. I don't know about all that. I do know that your story has a shape. So if we think about a little graph here, right? Along that center axis, we've got our story beats. And at the top, we've got positive emotions, and at the bottom, we've got negative emotions. You can make those positive emotions whatever you want, and the negative emotions whatever you want. This is just an illustration. So I don't, yeah, sorry. So is your story going to make your reader sad? Right now, I have the shape of a tragedy up. Is your story going to make a reader sad? Or is your story going to make a reader happy? Right? This is a joy story. It's a story that gets a little bad and then, whoo, man, things get good at the end. Is it going to make your reader happy? Or is your story going to start in one place? Things are going to get dicey and scary, like a Reacher novel. Is this going to work out? And then at the end, we're going to come back to everything being okay again, right? Vonnegut calls this the man in the hole plot. So what is the shape of the story you're writing? What is the emotional journey you're taking a reader on? If you want a reader to love your story so much that they're going to pass that story on to others, you need to be intentional about how that story is going to make those readers feel. And I don't mean, I'm not going to tell you that you got to graph it out, that you got to assign numerical values to every scene, or, I do that, but whatever. I'm not going to tell you have to do that, because I know some of you are pantsers and you're like, I don't like to plan. And I totally get that. I pants a lot myself too. I totally get that you don't like to plan. I'm not telling you to plan. I'm telling you to ask yourself, as you're starting this story, not just what are the beats of the plot, not just what's going to happen in this story, but to start asking yourself, how's this story going to make this reader feel? What's the feeling I'm going for? If we can just ask that question, we will be 10 steps ahead of where we are now to engaging a reader emotionally, so that that reader wants to pass that book on to somebody else. How does this story make the reader feel? So you can pass that book on to somebody else, right? Because what they want to share is that experience that they've had in the book. Think about a roller coaster. If I told you, hey, I'm going to take you on a roller coaster, I'm pretty sure it's going to be scary. I talked to the guy who just built it. He doesn't really know, but we'll figure it out as we get on the ride. You don't want to get on that roller coaster. You want the guy who built the roller coaster, or the woman or person who built the roller coaster, to know what that roller coaster is going to make you feel at every twist and turn, right? And that's what we're doing. We are crafting an emotional experience for our reader, so that our reader at every twist and turn is having an emotional engagement with our story, so that they're experiencing the story in a way that makes them go, oh, I want someone else to experience that too. They're going to pass that on to other readers. So what's the shape of your story? This is the first starting point. This is the big picture, right? The first question we want to ask is, what's the shape of my story? What's the emotional experience that I'm taking my reader on? Now, question number 2, we're going to illustrate character growth by evolving a character's voice. So now that we're asking, what's the emotional experience we're taking our reader on, we have to get to the next level, which is how our characters are growing and changing. Let me talk about what that's important. Before I totally get into why that's important, though, let me talk for a minute about what character voice is, because that's really key to taking your readers on an emotional journey, is understanding character voice. Now, if you saw my talk at this conference last year, you know all this. I'm not going to hit it in real heavy. I'm just going to cover it real quick, just so we have some common language to share. So your character voice, this is what we call the dialogue daisy, this picture you're looking at right now. Your character voice is the bloom of the daisy. It's what the reader actually sees when they walk out into the garden of your story, right? The roots of the daisy are your character's background, things like your character's genetics, your character's backstory, your character's place in the world, in the culture that they're in, and your character's wound. All of those things that those of us that plot a lot like to define, those things that you're going to put in your character Bible, those are all the roots of your flower. They're not the actual character voice that your reader is going to engage with. Out of the roots grow the character's personality. The personality is an expression of our background and who we are, and it is how the world engages with us and how we engage with the world. So this might be like, if you're using a strengths finder to find your character, this would be like their top strengths, or if you're using some kind of personality chart like the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs, whatever you're using, that personality is growing out of the backstory. And it's the stem. That personality is not the character voice, right? So when we say the character voice, we're not talking about like the hopes and fears of the character, what the character desires. That is all what supports the character voice, and the character voice comes out of that. But the personality is not what the reader directly engages with. What the reader directly engages with is the bloom of the character voice, right? The character voice itself is the words, meaning the topics and the character chooses to talk about, the language the character chooses to use, the character's body language. Body language communicates personality. The character's not just emotion, but how that emotion is being filtered and expressed through our personality. The character's cadence, which is the sentence structure that the character has. Do they talk in long sentences or short sentences? Do they use a lot of commas, creating run-on feel to their talk? Or are they short and clipped with 3 words and a period? Do they ask a lot of questions, right? Like all of these things are expressions of the character's personality. We'll get into that more later. And then the character's pacing, meaning how does the character speak when the character is with other characters in relationship to other characters in the story? How often does the character speak? Are they always starting conversations? Do they feel a need to end the conversation? Are they holding back during conversations, not speaking very often? Or are they entering into conversations all the time, talking always, right? Like, what is the pacing of your character? So that's your character voice: words, body language, cadence, and pacing. And if you have a personality for your character, you likely have a voice in your head. Whether or not that's being translated to the page is a whole different question. But if you have a personality, you likely have a character voice in your head. The question is, like, can you define it? So your characters have a voice, right? They have a way they present themselves on the page that the reader is going to look at and engage with. And that voice, just like in real life, when you meet somebody on the street, you don't meet them on the street and all of a sudden a like Enneagram number dings up above their head and they're like, this person is a 3. That's not how you engage people, right? Like when you meet them on the street, you engage with what is their representation in the world or their character voice, right? The words they're using, the body language they use when they talk to you, the cadence of their speech, and the pacing of the conversation, right? Like that's how we engage people in real life. So when we talk about character voice, we're just talking about how we're taking what already happens in real life and we're just applying it to our page in order to introduce our character's personality to our reader. Okay, now that we have some common language. When you're on an emotional journey with your reader is going to connect to one or more characters. I call that character your vehicle character, because that's the character that your reader is going to get in the car of your story with and go on this journey with. So if you think of your journey as this drive that your reader is going to take, this experience, like I used earlier, maybe it's a drive through the woods, or maybe it's a drive through the city, or maybe you're just looping around the Beltway at 2 a.m. in the morning, going as fast as you possibly can, hoping you don't get caught by the cops. Like maybe that's the emotional shape of your story. Whatever the emotional shape of your story is, you imagine it as your reader getting in a car with your lead character or characters and going on this drive. Your lead character or characters are called your vehicle. I'm not using the word protagonist because sometimes we have anti-heroes and the antagonist of the story is actually the one that we're connecting to in the vehicle. So protagonist and antagonist aren't very helpful words here. We're talking about your vehicle character. Who is your reader emotionally attaching to and following through the story? So later on in this talk, I'm going to use 3 examples, right? In Bridget Jones' Diary, the books or the movies, the vehicle character is Bridget. Right? We are following the story through Bridget's experiences. We want to be part of Bridget's world. In The Lord of the Rings, there's several vehicle characters, but one of the vehicle characters in The Lord of the Rings is Frodo. We follow Frodo through this great journey to Mordor to throw the rings into Mordor. Sorry, spoiler alert for Lord of the Rings. I feel like the time has passed enough that I don't have to worry about that. In the book, in Toni Morrison's book, Beloved, the vehicle character is Sethi. We are following Sethi through the story. We are following Sethi's emotional experience. We're directly tied to her. Right? Even though other characters take the stage at times, her daughter takes the stage at times, Paul D takes the center stage at times, we are tied to Sethi's emotional experience in that story. She's our vehicle. So we need to ask ourselves, not just what is the shape of the emotional story we're taking our reader on, but also what character or characters are the vehicles that our reader is riding with. Once we know the vehicle and the shape of the emotional story, we need to recognize that that character voice, Sethi's voice, Frodo's voice, Bridget's voice, needs to evolve through the book. As your character experiences these crazy, wild moments, they need to grow, and they need to change, and they need to be shaped through the story. And the way we express that growth, the way we illustrate that character growth to our reader, is by evolving their character voice. So ask yourself, who is the character at the beginning of the story? Right? In Beloved, Sethi has isolated herself in a house alone, and she's being haunted by a ghost that represents her past in slavery. And at the end of the story, secrets have been revealed, and there is freedom from the ghost. Not total freedom, it's with her forever, but you know what I mean. So she's evolved through the story. In The Lord of the Rings, Frodo starts the book as a nervous hobbit who's watched his Uncle Bilbo go on these adventures and is curious and has a deep sense of responsibility given to him by Gandalf. We see his voice evolve through all of these trials and struggles that he goes through this series till we get to the end where he has a far more mature understanding of the world, a far more mature understanding of power, and his voice has evolved. He sounds different. He talks different. He's been scarred by the ring itself, so his voice has changed some. And it is the change or the evolution in his character voice that brings about our knowledge of his character growth, right? When we are on a journey with a character, we want to see that character grow and change. Bridget Jones, at the beginning of the story, begins by saying she drinks too much, she cusses too much, and she's way too self-conscious about who she is. She's very concerned and nervous about who she is and how she presents to the world. We see her evolve through these romantic relationships and through these frustrating interactions that she's having with different people. And then at the end of the book, Bridget Jones, still the same Bridget Jones, but her voice has matured and evolved. She's more self-confident. It's easier for her to speak what she has to say. And she has a deeper understanding of self so that the people, the pacing, the people she's choosing to talk to and how she speaks to them has evolved and changed, right? In your story, we want to see your characters' voices mature and change and grow. If you can do that, if you can start your character in one place and then mature them through the story, this is a story that the reader is going to love going on. They're going to love it, right? Because they get to take that journey with the character. And when the character grows, you actually take them somewhere, right? And that's what they want. They got in the car to go somewhere with you. So as that character's voice grows, as the words, cadence, pacing, and body language morph and change, which we'll get into details more of that in a minute. But as they morph and change, over the whole course of the story, and your character matures or evolves. Whether this is a tragedy and your character is descending into darkness through the story, or a heroic rise and your character is becoming their true selves, or a romance in which your characters are finding each other and finding the joy of connection with one another, whatever it is, we want to see the vehicle characters, we want to feel their growth by the maturation of their voice. If you can pull that off, you're going to get readers going, hey, you got to check this out. You got to read this book. You need to try this. Because that's what we're coming for, right? We're coming for an emotional connection to this story. And watching a character struggle and grow and evolve is what brings about that connection. So far, I've given you 2 questions to ask about your story. Question number 1, right? How are you thinking about your plot as an emotional journey? What's the shape of your story? Question number 2, how is your character evolving and growing? And I do just want to take it aside here because I always get this pushback. I'm a thriller writer, right? Like that's what I love to read. That's what I love to write. And I love detective novels. And I always get this pushback. It's like, yeah, well, Jack Reacher doesn't change, right? Well, while that is technically true, that we do have these stoic thriller characters who always appear the same in the world, you still go on an emotional journey because the stakes in every single one of those books gets very high. And if he cannot maintain, if he cannot bring justice to whatever it is that Reacher's fighting, then everything's going to change. So those kind of thriller books, think of the shape of them as The Man in the Hole, where the stakes get deep, things get dangerous, everything's kind of scary. Reacher gets angry, right? Like he has emotional movements, and then he's able to bring justice to the world and make everything right again. It's A Man in the Hole shape, and Reacher does go on an emotional journey. Yes, he tends to end and begin in the same place, but that doesn't mean he didn't move as it goes through. So I just want to stop all of my fellow thriller writers from telling me that their characters don't need to grow. Your characters need to grow. They need to have an emotional journey. Your reader needs to go on an emotional experience with them. Their growth may stop and end at the same place, but we do need to go on a journey with twists and turns, right? It's not just a flat, straight line because we don't engage in that. Okay, that's my side note. Back to the main thing. Keep the main thing the main thing. 4 ways to reach readers with your book. We're going to think about our plot as an emotional journey. And we're going to start asking ourselves, what's the shape of that journey? And then we're also going to think about our character, our vehicle character that we know our reader is riding along with. And we're going to ask ourselves, how is our vehicle character growing as we're in this car with them? How are we hearing their character voice evolve as we go along? The third thing we're going to do is we're going to use our cast to empower the conflict with our character, right? We're going to use our cast really to empower that character evolution and growth. So I don't know about y'all, but I love big cast. I love big cast stories. TJ Klune, the House on the Cerulean Sea, has this amazing cast, and he's a fantastic writer who's able to carry multiple different sounding characters into a cast. It's really an incredible, incredible story. And I love watching the cast members interact. They're really great. He does a fantastic job with it. And so, I'm a sucker for I'm just going to put it out there in advance. I'm a sucker for a big cast story. If you can put a bunch of characters in front of me and they all have unique voices and they're all different, like being different from one another, and then they're going to rub against each other as the story goes and create this conflict. And that's what we're looking for, right? So we want to create a cast of characters that is going to drive the conflict of our story and push our character to emotional growth. So let's talk about that strategic placement of voice in our characters, right? Thinking about our story as an emotional journey and asking what's the shape of this story. We are looking at our characters and saying, okay, this is my vehicle character that the reader is going to go on this journey with. How is that character growing? And now we're going to ask ourselves, what cast members can I put around that character to empower the vehicle to grow? And I think there's 3 different types of characters. There's engines, there's anchors, and there's hazards. Now, Again, language here is complicated, and there's a reason. I'm not just using new terms to use them. I'm not just like, oh, I like new terms, so I'm going to throw new language at you. When I first started talking about this and I first started working with writers, we used to use the words ally, antagonist, and side character. But and those words are great. Like, I totally highly recommend Sasha Black's books on all of those. Fantastic. They're great. They deal with plot and the role of the character in the plot. I'm talking about the role of the character in the emotional growth of your vehicle character. And so an ally is a friend to your character, but the engine might be a friend. The engine might be an antagonist, right? The engine character can be either. The anchor character might be an antagonist. The anchor character might be a friend. The anchor character might move, right? They could be either. So that's why I'm using new words, because I need to, not because I like to create new words. So, sorry, I felt the need to explain that, because it's like, why are you giving me more words? There's enough words already. I know. So I feel you. So engine characters. Engine characters are going to encourage our vehicle character to become the best versions of themselves. So engine characters are going to push our vehicle character to become the absolute best version of themselves. Anchor characters are going to drag our character down, and they're going to try to pull our character down to the worst version of themselves. Hazard characters have big character voices that force our character to swerve. So if you think about your vehicle character as on this road, we're traveling on this road, we're looping the beltway of my city at 2 a.m., chaotically driving crazy. Please don't do that. That's very dangerous. But your story can, and it feels like this wild ride as we're going round and round. The engine character, as we're doing that round and round, is going to look at the vehicle and encourage the vehicle to be the best and strongest version of itself. The anchor character is going to encourage the vehicle to crash, right? The hazard character is going to force our vehicle to move around all the time to create those moments where our vehicle has to make decisions, right? So 3 different types. And let's break down what these voices look like a little bit more, because all of these voices complement and contrast our vehicle characters. So when we're around the engine voices, oh man, I'm looking at this slide. I'm like, oh, I didn't actually change the language of this slide. That's fine. When we're around the engine voices, being around them calls the vehicle to be the best version of itself. Some aspects of the personality are going to mimic what we hope our vehicle will become. So let's talk about Sam and Frodo. As Frodo is on this journey to get rid of the ring, we want Frodo to become the noble hero that saves the world. We want him to be steady. We want him to be determined. We want him to be perseverant. We want him to find that inner strength. And we want him to remember the joy and love he has for the community that he left to empower him. How, as Tolkien, do you get Frodo to have moments where he can be challenged to be that person? You put next to him Sam, who is his engine character, who is those things. So that when Frodo's struggling, Sam can look at him and go, come on, Mr. Frodo, we can do it together. Right? The engine character represents, in some ways, the best version of the vehicle. The engine character looks like, in some ways, what we want the vehicle to look like. In other ways, the engine character challenges the vehicle. Right? When the vehicle begins to struggle, the engine character shows up to tell the vehicle, that's not right, you're on the wrong path. Tolkien has a fantastic anchor character as well in Gollum. The anchor character also shares aspects of our vehicle character. So the anchor characters, For example, Gollum and Frodo, Frodo's anchor and Gollum, they're experiencing the same craving to take the power that they found and reject the quest and disappear with it, to call it their precious and disappear into a world of their own. We need those anchor characters around to constantly be challenging our vehicle characters to walk away from the journey, right? To become the worst versions of themselves. So Sam and Gollum, very different, right? And that Sam is like, hey, let's keep going. We've got to do this for the Shire where we came from. Whereas Gollum is like, filthy hobbits, take the precious, protect the precious, guard the precious. It's your precious. We have that tension in Frodo. He has both aspects of his anchor and his engine, which is what creates that great conflict. As Frodo's voice matures, we hear him sometimes sounding like Sam, and then we hear him sometimes sounding like Gollum, and it creates, when he does, creates the shape of our story, right? The shape of our story is created by your vehicles' moments with their engines and their anchors. And then we throw in hazards. Tolkien has so many great hazard voices. These characters that don't show up a ton all the time, but when they show up, they're big, loud voices, right? There's something very unique about the words and language that they use, or there's something very unique about their body language, or there's something very unique about their pacing, right? When they speak and how, or their cadence, how they speak to one another. We exaggerate these voices to create these hazards, and we want to go big with them. We don't want to hold back. We want to go really big to force in the scene our vehicle to swerve, right? So let's look at a couple more examples. In the story of Beloved, right, we're on Sethi's journey. We have our engine character in Paul D, who shows up at the beginning of the book and is constantly encouraging Sethi, trying to pull Sethi back into community, trying to pull Sethi to embrace the horrors of her past as he has. And there's things about Paul D's voice, right? His desire to connect when he talks to Sethi, his courage to stand up to the ghost of the house, right? His willingness to go and seek out the truth of what's happened in this world, right? There's things with Paul D that we long to have for Sethi. The family that Paul D longs for, we long for Sethi to also have. So you have that engine voice that's calling and representing what we hope Sethi will grow into. We also have the anchor voice in Beloved, the mysterious woman that shows up, or the ghost in the house, who is calling Sethi to remain the worst version of herself, the isolated, alone, and scared, dominated by her past and unable to connect with others. Right? So we have these two voices that pull Sethi in both directions. And then we have characters like Sethi's grandmother who show up and say, like, get me something that's the color yellow, right? Or we see her preaching. We have Sethi's memory of her preaching out in the glen. And they're these big, loud voices that call Sethi to react and reflect and move. I hope you're starting to see how, as you think about the shape of your story, of the emotional shape of your story, you start thinking about the journey you want to take your vehicle character on, that now you have some tools to start empowering that journey, right? If you want this character to experience failure, stick them around the anchor, right? Have them tempted by the anchor, or put them with the engine and have them reject the engine. If you want the reader to experience moments of success and delight as your character grows and matures into who the reader hopes they'll become, have them unite with the engine and have them reject the anchors, right? And you can start to craft the emotional journey of your character just by putting them in conversations, putting them in scenes with these other cast members. Another example, Bridget Jones' Diary. This is one of my favorite. I come back to this. This is one of my favorite romances. So Bridget Jones' Diary, We've got Bridget at the beginning saying, I can't be who I am anymore. I have to change. And then we immediately get an engine and an anchor character that connects to him, connects to her. Daniel Cleaver is her anchor. He encourages the worst habits in her life, all the things she's trying to get rid of. He's like, here, have another cigarette. He's questioning her body and how she looks. He's making her doubt herself all the time. He's telling her that commitment isn't a big deal, that, you know, she's thinking things too much and she just needs to relax and enjoy. Bridget, will you just chill out? Right? Like Daniel's encouraging, even though she is attracted to him, he's encouraging the worst side of her behavior. On the other end, we have the amazing Darcy, Colin Firth's character, who Bridget is connecting to in a very different way. Right? For Colin Firth's character, she's constantly at odds with him and they're rubbing against each other and they're fighting all the time. Right? But when she's in conflict with him, she is the version of herself that she wants to be. She's confident. She speaks her mind. Her bad habits go away and she knows exactly what she wants to say when she's with him. It is the Bridget that we want to see, the Bridget we want her to mature into. When she is with the Darcy character, that's who she becomes, right? And we love it. And then she's got her friends around her and her mother and her father, these big hazard characters that force her to make decisions, not just about herself, but about the world that she's in. So what's the shape of your story, the emotional shape of your story? What's the journey that your vehicle character is going on? And how are you using your engines, anchors, and hazards to shape and illustrate that emotional story? If you can start asking these three questions, you'll start building a story that readers want to read. So we've been talking about the global arc of the story. For the fourth one, I want to get down into the scene by scene level. How are you communicating emotional change by modulating your character's voice at the scene level? So we've talked about what a character voice is. Character voice is words, the language our character uses, body language, the way the character takes up space in the world, right? Like the movements the character has, cadence, which is the character's structure of sentences and paragraphs and how the character is using those things, and then pacing, where the character speaks in relation to others, right, that are in the conversation. So these are the components of your character's voice. Now, let's talk a second about modulation. Again, I did this in my last talk, so if you watched me last year, you probably saw this. You can probably buy that from the Alliance of Independent Authors somewhere. Go buy it. The Alliance of Independent Authors is great. Love them. Anyway, modulating character voice. So I'm just going to do this real quickly. In the world, when you interact with other people, do you speak differently depending on your emotional state? Right? We can say it's depending on your role or depending on the circumstances, but really it all comes back to your emotional state. So there on the right is a picture of my wife. When I speak to my wife, I'm vulnerable, I'm open, I'm my true self because I feel emotionally safe with her. On the left is a barista. When I talk to a barista, I'm professional, I'm more focused, I want to get what I want to get, I like my coffee and I want to get out of there. In the middle, example of friends. When I talk to friends, we laugh, we joke, we have a good time, not as vulnerable as my wife, but not as professional as a barista. There's a different voice I have. Now, I'm always me in all of these settings. My personality doesn't change, but the expression of my personality through the character voice shifts a little bit. My pacing, when I talk, my cadence, how much I talk, right? The language and the words I use, they all shift a little bit to communicate my emotional state and the expectations that I have in this conversation. Our brains as people are hardwired to work that way. Right? We look for the modulation in other people's voices to understand what the expectations in our conversations are with them. If we start crossing that modulation, people get very uncomfortable. If I went to my barista and I talked to my barista like I talked to my wife, my barista is going to be very uncomfortable with me. If I talk to my wife like I talk to my barista, my wife is not going to be very happy with me because that is not the appropriate modulation for a conversation with my wife. Right? So you get what modulation is and how it's hardwired into us. So we want to be modulating our characters' voices to communicate scene by scene emotional expression, right? To communicate in a scene how our characters are doing emotionally. And then, like I said, across the whole story to communicate change. So we've got our baseline voice. which is kind of, let's say, the voice that comes most common to you from the character. If you think about like the voice that stems directly out of the character's personality, that's what the baseline is. And then we've got the modulating voice, which is a change in circumstances, conversation partners, or emotional state. So if you're talking to your wife, your character's talking to their wife or their friends. If your character's talking to someone they trust, or someone they don't know. If your character has a role that has a certain voice associated with it, like for example, if your character is a cop, or if your character is a doctor, or if your character is a student talking to a professor, we modulate our voices in those circumstances too. Now, let me say this, modulate in baby steps. Small modulations. We're not, a shy character isn't suddenly going to become confident, right? Like we're going to modulate in baby steps. So let's look at an example of that. Wrong way. Let's look at an example of that. So this is a confident character's voice. Confident character's voice, words, they share their opinions firmly, right? Like confident characters aren't afraid to share when it comes to their words and the language that they choose. They share openly and strongly. Their body language, they make good eye contact. They may even talk with their hands, right? But they're going to connect with eye contact, and they're going to have multiple sentences because they're confident in what they're saying. So for their cadence, we're going to have like 3 sentences per utterance, right? Like they're not just going to say, yep. They're going to say like, yes, I agree. I think that's correct. That's a confident answer from a confident character. 3 sentences, all ending in periods, right? And in a conversation with other people, a confident character is going to speak often, right? They're going to enter the conversation often because they are confident. So they're not afraid to talk often. But let's say you're in the dark night of the soul and your confident character is having this big emotional experience, and their experience is self-doubt, right? Their voice is going to modulate. They might hold back with their opinion. They might find themselves looking down, maybe for the first time in the book, right? They might keep to just one sentence. Yeah, I think I agree with that. And then they might slow down their pacing and not enter the conversation as much. Your reader is going to feel that emotional change because it's how their brains are wired to experience emotional change in the real world, right? They're going to feel the difference in your reader. That's the emotional journey that they want to be on with your character. It's the evolution that they want to see. And that kind of modulation starts to shape your story. Let's give another example of a shy character, right? Their voice, the words and language they use pushes the conversation away from themselves. So a shy character doesn't want attention on them. So the words and language they use is focused away from them, right? They don't make eye contact. They're looking at their watch, they're looking at their phone, they're looking over there, they're looking over here. They're not making eye contact, right? Because they're shy. They're using small sentences because they don't actually want to be engaged in the conversation. So yeah, that sounds right. Right? Small, short, clipped sentences, and they rarely speak in a give and take of the conversation. But then in the critical moment of your plot beats in the shape of your story, the heroic upswing in the shape of your story, now they have to take a stand, and the shy character is suddenly going to speak their mind. They're going to look up for the first time, and we're going to go, yeah, and they're going to use 3 sentences. Yes, I think that's right. And it's what we should do. And I'm willing to take a stand for it. And they're not afraid to interrupt others in a conversation, although they've never done that before. Right. So modulating our character's voice to create moments of emotional expression in a scene level, and then taking our character and using those moments to create that whole shape of the story, that's going to grab a reader's heart. And a reader's going to go on that experience and be like, oh man, you got to check this out. So let's go through it all real quick. First, you guys, what's the shape of your story? What does this journey you're taking your reader on feel like? You're lining up these plot beats in order to create an emotional experience. What is that experience? Second, how are you illustrating character growth by evolving that character's voice? If a shy character is shy at the beginning of the story, what's that shy character like at the end of the story? How do they sound? What are they doing with the words they use to communicate to the reader that they're changing? Third, how are you using your cast to empower that change? right? To take us on this emotional journey. How are you using engines and anchors and hazards to swerve the car around, to make this journey more interesting, to give us some emotional movement as we go? And then fourth, at that scene level, as they engage with those engines, as they engage with those anchors, as they engage with those hazards, what is happening in the modulation of the character voice? Start asking these questions and you're going to build a story that readers want to pass to other readers. All right, I'm out of time. I'm the Dialogue Doctor. If you want to know more about dialogue, come to dialogue-doctor.com. Thanks again, everybody, for giving me this opportunity. It was a real honor.